so you want to start with just an introduction of you.
Introduction is, I will be at your house at noon. Oh, was I not supposed to read that part? Um, okay, when do you want to start?
As soon as you're ready.
Okay, my name is Dennis Kapp, and my father was Elmer Kapp, and my mother was Genevieve Ortiz, O-R-T-I-Z. Ortiz is sort of like Smith, you might say, in Latin languages or Latin countries. Awful lot of them anyway. Anyway, I was born at an early age, and about a year roughly after my, not even a year, maybe about 8 or 9 months, 9 months at least, after my parents were married. They got married in July, and I came along in April. And I'm the oldest of my siblings, born in 1947. My mother was born in 1921, and my dad was born in 1922. And my dad's parents came from Germany to the United States in the mid-teens. I think somewhere 1915 or 16, somewhere in there, maybe 1917. My mother's parents, her father was born in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and his family had been in that area for some generations, going back to when New Mexico was part of Mexico. And my grandmother, her family came from the south of Spain, and in the area, I would say, of Barcelona, which is a beautiful seaside area in Spain. And my grandmother, one of my memories was that she made for Grandpa his favorite dish, which was roast leg of lamb in the oven, and it was so good. I would sit and watch it for hours when I was a kid, just coming back to see it cooking and waiting for it to get done. So one time I was on a business trip to Barcelona, and a customer took us up a hill to a restaurant for lunch. And about halfway up the hill, or a mountain, or whatever it was, I started to smell Grandma's lamb. And I told the lady and her son that, that smells like my grandma's lamb. And they said, well, there's a restaurant just up ahead that is famous for lamb in this area, and it cooks a certain style of cooking for the lamb indigenous to the area. Anyway, we ended up going there for lunch instead of the restaurant that they had planned, and it was Grandma's lamb. It was incredible. And so, I mean, eventually I found Grandma's lamb again. And my Aunt Becky, I asked her several times over the years, must be some way that she knows how to cook Grandma's lamb. But Aunt Becky said whenever Grandma made lamb, she would go out to eat because she didn't like lamb. How sad. We lost that recipe. Anyway, so along came Dennis in 1947. Now, my earlier memories are like my first memory. I was 3 years old, and my Aunt Becky, who was my mother's youngest sister, youngest sibling, Aunt Becky was handing candy out for Halloween, and I was standing there in the vestibule with her. And I asked Aunt Becky how old I was, and she told me I was 3.5. So that's the youngest memory that I have of anything. I'm sure, I don't know how old I was, but I remember a man coming to the front door and putting young kids on the back of a pony and taking pictures. So I remember my picture getting taken with a pony, and I think I even put a cowboy hat or something on me. I don't know how old I was. And, but I was born at an early age, so, I mean, there were a lot of things happening at that time. Not quite as early age as Asians. You might know Asians are born at 1 year old. They're 1 year old when they come along. And in some Asian countries, everybody turns a year older at the Asian New Year. So theoretically, let's say you were born in December, at 1 comes Asian New Year in January, you could already be 2 years old and not only be 2 months old in this country. So I was born much earlier than the Asians. I was born at 0. And so was my dad. I asked him about that one time, and he said he was born also at 0. So I guess it's a family tradition to be born at early age. And anyway, childhood experiences. Well, I remember, we went to Our Lady Gate of Heaven, Joe and I, when we were young, which I think still exists at St. Mary's in Chicago. I went there for 1, 2, and 3, and Joe went there for only the 1st and 2nd grade. And during the summer before 4th grade, my dad showed us a brochure on this school in Monroe, Michigan, that was a military school. And he says, and the brochure had pictures of archery, horseback riding, bowling, and ice skating on a pond. And I thought, boy, this looks like fun, And so I said, sure, Dad, and Joe got stuck going because generally as the oldest one, I was the one that made a lot of those decisions. And so we all went off to military boarding school. And unfortunately, they had disposed of archery and horseback riding and bowling before we got there. The brochure was a little outdated. We did have the ice skating out on St. Joseph's Pond and other activities and so on. I remember my first day at that school was quite an experience. Growing up on Coyle and in Detroit, my friends lived most on Coyle or around the corner on Robeson. And in the morning, when we didn't have school, my friends would show up at my house. And what are we going to do, Dennis? I don't know if it was because I was the older one or the bossy one, but they always seemed to come by my house to figure out what to do for the day. And if it was a rainy day, we'd often camp in somebody's garage and play Monopoly. It was a nice day, we'd find activities from building a fort behind the sign at the corner, that had a structure in steel that we could get wood from various places and factories a few blocks away and build ourselves a fort. Or if it was the early rain and early in the year, there was a place we could go and try to make little rafts and float them. And walk from raft to raft. But we'd find a lot of different things to do. When I got to boarding school, the first day I went out on the playground and kids were gathering to play baseball. And I saw one kid seem to be organizing, so I says, okay, you be a captain and I'll be a captain. And the guy looked at me and he says, I'll be a captain and Buffalino over there will be a captain, and you'll be lucky if we let you play. And I was like flabbergasted. Was not what I was used to. Learning experience. And, playing with a larger group and fitting in now with people that didn't know Dennis, had been there in school for 3 years already because I'm joining in the 4th grade. And but it was a great experience, I think. And the boarding school with the nuns, they straightened me out. And by the sixth grade, I was an officer, and then a bigger officer in seventh, and somewhere along the line, I think in seventh grade, they made me the biggest officer that could be done, which was first lieutenant. And I was made the head of the band, and got some medals for that. And although they called it orchestra, I think it was more of a band because we only had maybe about 30 or 40 members. But anyway, we traveled around to different places, to other schools and venues to perform in different states. So it was a fun activity to be a member of the band. I played saxophone, although the first year everyone had to take piano first year of music, and then after that you could choose a instrument that you wanted. Joe took flute, and I took the saxophone. And we were both very lonely in the beginning. We missed our parents. In the beginning at the school, we could only see our parents for 4 hours on Sunday, and they would pick us up with, Billy Allen, a very good friend of the family, and we'd go to a restaurant for lunch and then go back, again feeling lonesome to leave our parents and not see them for another week. It was considered a privilege to see your parents on the weekend, and if you got demerits, I don't know how many it was, maybe 10 demerits during the week or something, talking, or me, I was a bookworm reading a book while we're supposed to be marching, or any other kind of thing that you would get demerits for. If you got 10 of them, you couldn't see your parents on the weekend. You were grounded. My parents, were blind. So I remember as young kids, I don't remember how old we were, but the doctor, if we were sick or had a cold or a flu or whatever, the doctor would come to our house. He was only 4 blocks away. And sometimes Mom would walk us there, but particularly in the wintertime, the doctor would come to visit us. And we knew that if the doctor came to see us, we were going to get a shot. So I just remember Joe and I would hide behind furniture, chairs, hoping nobody would find us. But that might have worked for Mom and Dad because they were blind. But it sure didn't work for the doctor. He found us every time. I don't remember when we realized that other parents could see, and so on. I remember, really early thinking, how come my Aunt Becky can see and my mom and dad can't? Because I remember my first thought was that old people can't think or can't see, and my parents were older, so it must be something older people can't see, like I can see things. And but eventually learned that it was just Mom and Dad that had this problem, and we started to meet the children and friends of other blind people, and we gained new insight into this phenomenon that many people were blind and their children could see. And at an early age, I remember meeting my dad's second wife. My mother died when she was only 51, and I think I was about 22 or 23 in that range. Dawn was about 2 years old, I think, at that time. And I have a few nice pictures of my mom with Dawn and and Dawn's mother, Joyce, and myself. And then my dad remarried to May, who could see. She was a great sports fan, maybe even bigger than Dad, I think, sometimes, if that's possible. And they had 35 years together. And May just recently passed away about 2 weeks ago. My dad died about 3 years ago in November 2nd. Anyway, so back to early childhood. Aunt Becky used to take us places like movie theaters and other things like that when we were young, bowling, all kinds of things. I mean, or just out to get an ice cream because she could see, and as she drove, and got older, even though she was the youngster of the family, she took us to do things that we might not have had the opportunity with having blind parents. Billy Allen and his family took vacations with us every year, and Billy Allen and Esther and his wife would take us to Edgewater Park, Amusement Park, or other activities. Billy and Esther, they were like May and her husband, first husband, Carl. They were spotters or scorekeepers for the Blind Bowling League. And that was a big help because every team had to have somebody that could see, to keep score and to help people find the alley where to bowl and so on. And my mom and dad met at a blind bowling league. They both signed up at the same time, and they both met their first year at the blind bowling league. And as my dad used to say, I met your mom in an alley near the gutter. And Mom didn't like that. And the person that introduced him was also a very good friend of the family for many years. He's passed away now, but his children continue his legacy. But Tony Tamer introduced my mom and dad at the bowling league. And I always used to tell Tony that if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here. Anyway, my mom used to go to church every day. And when I was young, I remember her coming back from church, to make us our lunches to go to school. And she'd already have walked 12 blocks there for a quick mass and 12 blocks back, to make us our lunch so that we could go to school. And we went to school at the same place she was going to mass, before. That was in first, second, third grade. And so on. My mom was extremely religious. Her letters, I wish I had one a few years ago. I don't know where it is, but I have to find it sometime. I know I'll find it because I sure wouldn't throw it away. And Mom wrote letters to us in military school. And the letters were so good, and I guess so religious, so full of faith, and so on, that the nuns were always begging me for my mother's letters. And that's why I have few. I have all the letters that I wrote to my mom from military school. Joyce was kind enough to put them in a binder for me. But the letters that my mother wrote to me, there's only one that I've been able to find, because the nuns, and I don't mean just the nuns that I had, but nuns throughout the school were always asking me if they could have one of my mother's letters, because they all thought my mother was a saint. And so I learned religion, and I would say things like that from my mother. And from my father, I learned a lot about business, because he talked business at the table just about every day. And when I was able to get a driver license at 14, I'd be driving him around, taking him to work during the summertime, and then his, breaks and school breaks and so on. And then I drove to Catholic Central every day when I went to high school, and would go to the office or go to work, visit customers, and so on. But always I brought my dad back from work when I lived at home before I got married, and Dad and I would summarize the business day, what I did, what he did, and what we got to do tomorrow. So I learned a lot. And I mean, he used to bring mail for me to read from the office for him when I was young. I'm sure he could have gotten somebody like Aunt Betty to read, or Aunt Becky, but he would bring mail for me to read from the time I was 7 or 8 years old, because he was always telling me, you learn a lot about business from reading the mail. And later on, as I started acquiring businesses, first thing I'd do is sit down and read and open their mail and see what was going on, see who their suppliers were, what kind of prices they were paying, who was buying what on purchase orders, what prices they were paying, who were if somebody was dunning them for not paying their bills, I could see what was going on there. But I could learn a lot about the business, as Dad said, from reading the mail. And so, what kind of lunches, what difference it makes? How did my dad become blind? Questions from my daughter, Dawn. Well, I'll back up to Ashley's questions first. Ashley wanted to know what kind of music I listened to when I was young. Well, I mean, if you turn on 50s on 5 on Sirius Radio, you'll hear exactly what I was listening to. I was young, and when I was really young, I was born in 47. A lot of good music came out from 55 to 1960, and I was, let's say, 8 to 13 years old, and I listened to Elvis Presley and Freddie Cannon, and I watched Ricky Nelson and his family on TV, the Nelsons, and Ricky sang a song at the end of every program. That was Ozzie and Harriet, was that, and and I watched The Beaver and those kind of things when I was young, and liked rock and roll. I mean, I had probably 200 records, 45s, a lot of 33s, and I, pardon me?
8 tracks.
8 tracks came way later. 8 tracks came probably 20 years later, Guess they sure weren't around when I was young. There was no tapes or whatever of music or CDs. It was 45s, and then came 33s and so on. And before that was another format. What were they? I forget the big ones that hired before the 45s, that my parents listened to. I didn't have very many of those. But as I got older and was a young teenager, I used to put on 33s at night, and I liked not only rock and roll, I started to expand. I liked show tunes I started listening to when I was 14, 15, 16. And I listened to Latin music. I don't know why I liked Latin music. I'm sure I didn't feel that I was Latin at that time, but I loved Latin music, and I listened to Xavier Cugat and so on. Your mother's favorite song, I think, as we were dating, was Blue Velvet. She loved Blue Velvet. And if that came on, she'd turn up the radio. And we would sit for hours in my car, and Mom and I, and listen just to music. I mean, we'd sit down in front of her parents' house, or we'd sit down around the corner in case we were macking or smooching, so we wouldn't be in front of the front door, and listen to music. And it was, rock and roll, and Little Richard and so on. But your mother liked the softer music, Johnny Burnett and Bobby Vinton and that kind of thing. And frankly, I did too. And your mother wasn't as much into the Latin, but I took her when we were about 16 to see at the Northland Playhouse, which was basically a tent that went up on Northland Drive by the Northland Mall every summer. And they had plays. And I remember the first one your mother and I saw was The Sound of Music. And then a few weeks later, they had My Fair Lady. And then a few weeks later, they had Camelot. So we saw those three the first summer, and we were so excited, I went out and bought Fisher season tickets. And your mother, I don't know if she still has them. I mean, up until a couple of years ago, she still had them, maybe still does, fourth row center. And that we eventually got. The first couple of years we didn't have those, but every year I would write and say, can you get us a little bit better seats? Can you get us better? By the time we were 20 or so, we had the fourth row center, and that's as good as it gets because you don't want to be on top of them looking up somebody's nose, while they're performing. We saw many plays. We saw we saw Ella Fitzgerald. We saw, I can't remember the gay singer that sings all the really soft ballads that your mom and I love to dance to, and so on, that we used to go listen to. And he came to the
Tiny
Fisher.
Tim?
Who?
Tiny Tim?
No.
Elton
No.
John?
No, Elton John came way, he wasn't even born, I don't think, I just drawing a blank, I'm sorry. But we saw many individual performers of the day, plus, we saw the plays, generally an average of 5 musicals or theatrical plays per year. And when we got married, we went to New York, and we traveled all over. But in New York, we saw, I just had it on the tip of my tongue, Mame. And it was starring, a fabulous, incredible singer that, everybody would know now. And I mean, if she was still alive, she was the best of the best. And incredible singer. But anyway, we enjoyed plays. We got married in 1967, June 17th. June 17th had the significance. We set that date 5 years before we got married. And we, the date of significance of the date, it was the date that her parents got married. And, Dawn, we had 2 names, Dawn and Deborah. And we went back and forth about whether to call her Deborah or call her Dawn. And I would say up until the last minute we weren't sure, but we finally decided Dawn Marie. Her grandmother, her mom's mom, didn't like that name. I mean, she constantly told us that Dawn is a time of day, not a saint's name. There's no Saint Dawn, and we can't name our daughter Dawn. Even a year, 2 years after Dawn was born, she was still unhappy with this name. And she always wanted to take care of Dawn, but she didn't like the name Dawn. Lawrence, of course, was named after his grandfather on his mom's side, who none of us ever met because he died when, Dawn's mom, Joyce, was probably 12 years old or so, if I remember correctly. And I didn't meet her till she was 16, so, or maybe 15, but 15 or 16. Of course, I married a much older woman because she's 9 months older than me. but I can't remember exactly how much or what the age was when we met. I met her mom at a party in the neighborhood where I lived. I used to go to, parties as a young teenager nearby to the Liebert family, my cousins, and there was a redhead young lady that went to those parties that I had a crush on, but she had a boyfriend, and I figured I would wait him out. Well, if I had waited, I'd still be waiting, because I understand they're now married and been married for about 50 years. But anyway, at the time I had a crush on that girl, and I went to those parties hoping that eventually I would get to know her better. And my dad, when there was a party in the neighborhood one day, my dad says, "No, you're not going all the way to Redford," which was probably 10 miles away, "to a party when there's one in the neighborhood. Just go up the street." And if I hadn't been pushed by my dad, I wouldn't have met Dawn and Lawrence and Liz and Denny's mom. Because after that we became friends, we talked on the phone a lot, and then started seeing each other more and more, and so on, and eventually I hired her to work for the family business. Anyway, what else is there? So in that time range, or in that time frame, they have a law in Michigan, and maybe many other states, that if your parents through handicap are unable to drive, then you can get a driver's license at the age of 14. So I got a driver's license at 14, and got a car, an older car at first, and driver's license, a briefcase, and my dad said, "Okay, I'm the inside now and you're the outside." So I started making sales calls, and my first day, I know I went to General Motors Tech Center, met a nice older man by the name of Jerry Larson, who was the buyer for Manufacturing Development Division of GM, and I gave him my pitch after traveling with my dad with the leader dog, and without the dog, making calls for some time, from probably age 11 till then. And before I got back to the office, Mr. Larson called the office and actually gave my dad an order for 6 72-inch parallel straight edges, which at that time sold for 50 or 60 bucks a piece. And it was a heck of a nice order. My dad was proud, and I was really proud. And I figured, boy, that's like taking candy from a baby. This was easy. Wasn't always that easy, but I found always sales to be pretty easy. Anywho, so Daddy hired your mom. She was the second secretary, and when she got really close to having Dawn, she retired and never went back to the work at the office. And so Dawn's name came from out of the air, I'll say, and Lawrence's name came from his grandfather that none of us had met other than, Mom, obviously. And Elizabeth came from her grandmother's first name, and her middle name, Genevieve, came from my mother's first name, Genevieve Ortez. And then came Denny, and I wanted Denny to be Elmer. My dad's middle name was Dennis, which is where I got my name, although Dad always said that he got his middle name from his favorite Uncle Dennis, and that I got my name from his Uncle Dennis also. But I always figured I got my dad's middle name. My mother said she didn't have the gumption or whatever to name a son Elmer because of the cartoon character and so on. And I said, yeah, but what about the song Elmer's Tune? And my dad's name is Elmer. I had a cousin who was named after his dad, Oscar, and I was so jealous that he got to be Oscar. But then when he was 11 years old and getting kidded in school, he changed his name legally to Bud. But then when he was about 20 or 21 or somewhere in there, he changed his name back to Oscar. So now he's Dr. Oscar Kapp. And I so much wish I had been Elmer. So I wanted one of my sons at least to be named Elmer. And Mom talked about it a little bit, but then when it came down to the money and she had to fill out the form, she put it Dennis Elmer. So I still address mail to Denny as D initial Elmer Kapp, and so on, because I always thought that's the way he should, write his name. But as he got older, he started using Denny instead of Dennis, and sort of has not put the Elmer in his name ever. Anyway, it's a good family name. The other good family name that's got a lot of use is Sebastian, after my grandfather, Sebastian Kapp, my dad's dad. We have Sebastian, Liz's youngest son, and my brother Douglas, his middle name is Sebastian, and there's more Sebastians too, I'm sure, in this family. And
his grandson.
Whose grandson?
Joe's grandson.
Oh, Joe's grandson is Sebastian. And there's more middle names Sebastians too, I think, around. I mean, it's become one of the common family names, just like my mother, Genevieve, and so on, and her mother, who was also Genevieve. My grandmother on my dad's side, her name was Linda, and I have a cousin, Linda, but for some reason her name didn't get as much play in the family, and I don't know why. Only one Linda I know of. Anyway, so much for the names, music, and how did the grandchildren get their name? I have no idea. Ashley. What's your middle name, Ashley? Elizabeth. Oh, I know where that came from. And
From her aunt.
pardon me?
Her aunt.
And
Elizabeth.
yeah,
And grandma.
and her grandma. Great grandma. That's right, Elizabeth. But the Ashley, where did that come from?
I saw a picture in a magazine of a little girl in a field with Goldilocks hair, just flowing down, kneeling down, and it was like a really beautiful scene, like sun in the background, and it had Ashley, and it was a commemorative plate of some type. So I ripped it out of the magazine, and I said, I want my daughter to be named Ashley, and 5 years later I had an Ashley.
Okay. And what are you going to name your first daughter, Ashley?
Elmarie.
Elmira or Elmarie?
Elmarie.
Elmarie, after Elmer. That's nice. My dad finally gets a first name. At one time, I know my dad was saying that he'd give $1,000 check to the first one of his children or grandchildren that names one of their boys Elmer, and but it never happened. I told Dad, man, you can't even buy it. It was somebody named after you. Closest one was Denny Elmer, D. Elmer actually, Kapp. So anyway, then happy childhood memories with your siblings. I don't know, Joe and I going off to boarding school, military school together. Joe made officer before me. He was a corporal. and I think he was a corporal when he was in 4th grade, and then I don't think I became an officer till 6th grade. 4th grade, they were still trying to straighten me out, I would say. 5th grade, the nuns couldn't believe I was straightened out, and in 6th grade they made me a sergeant, which is more than a corporal. So I jumped over Joe a little bit. And then 7th grade, I believe, I became 1st lieutenant, and so on, which hardly anybody could believe. So,
What were the dynamics in your house? Where did you live, and where did your brothers and sisters
well,
live?
that's a good point. Douglas and I, first I lived downstairs, and my dad had Uncle Louie, who was married to my favorite aunt, Aunt Betty, and Uncle Louie would be my favorite uncle, I would say, he came and built an addition on the back of our house that became my bedroom. And he made bookcases from knotty pine because I was a reader from an early age. He made nice closet with sliding doors out of knotty pine, and all the walls were knotty pine. And I loved it. And had windows that I could crank open in the summertime to get fresh air. Didn't have air conditioning out there or anything. I don't know if our house had air conditioning. I don't know. But I know my area didn't have air conditioning, but it was nice. Anyway, but when we were first born, there was a bedroom, second bedroom that was only 2-bedroom house, was next to my parents' bedroom. So I was there, and then Joe came along, and Joe was there. But at 2 years old or thereabouts, Grandma convinced my mom to have Joe move upstairs with them. My dad had bought an income house, they called it. You had the main house downstairs and big basement and so on, but upstairs was an apartment that you could rent out to get some additional income. And upstairs he gave, rent-free to Grandma, Grandpa, and Aunt Becky. Well, they took Joe upstairs because he had asthma, and Grandma felt that she could watch him better, keep the humidifier going for him, and so on, and take care of him better than Mom might because of his asthma. So Joe lived upstairs. He'd come downstairs sometimes to eat, sometimes he'd eat upstairs. Grandma, it was sort of nice because, we had food cooking both places, so you could go get a little bit of Grandma's food and bring it down, or just eat Mom's, whatever she had today. Mom tended to cook a lot of Mexican food. Grandma always was cooking Mexican food. Mom also, though, cooked a lot of steak, mashed potatoes, and spaghetti for Dad. My dad was a meat and potato guy in those days, and Mom would buy sirloin steaks, big ones that would fill the bottom of the plate or the frying pan, and she'd fry them up for Dad. And sometimes I'd eat Dad food, and sometimes if I felt like Mexican and we had Dad food, I'd go upstairs and get some of Grandma's frijoles and rice and whatever else she had cooking. We always had tortillas, always. And I used to put everything in a tortilla. Whatever I decided to eat, if it was steak, we had mashed potatoes and steak, or spaghetti and steak, which was pretty common too, then I would put the tortillas and mashed potato, put everything together in the tortilla, or spaghetti in the tortilla. I remember one time I was probably, I'll say 10 years or older, maybe 12. I don't know. I really don't remember. I just know I wasn't real young. And then Becky came in and saw me putting spaghetti in my tortilla and said, "You're not supposed to put that in a tortilla." And I thought, why come? Why for? It tasted good to me. But we had good tortillas, nice homemade thick tortillas all the time. And I don't know, I know sometimes I made tortillas on the stove. My mother must have mixed the batter. I don't know, the batter would be there, and Mom would say, make some tortillas when I was young, so I would. From my earliest memory, I had KP duty or dishes, and my mom was a very slow eater because she'd serve everybody, and then she would sit down and she would really take her time to enjoy her food. So I was always waiting for her dishes to finish the dishes, because I couldn't go on with anything else till the dishes were done. And I remember even when I was dating your mom, my dad cut my days down to 3 or 4 days and distributed some of the dish work to Doug, because Joe was living upstairs. And I would still have to come home and do dishes, even if I was, dating Mom and had other things to do, getting close to the wedding and so on. But I remember my house was finished that I started building when I was 19. It was finished in December. Your mom and I were getting married in June. So for 6 months I had a schedule, I had a house, but my dad was still insisting I come and do dishes 3 days a week. But there was one advantage. I did get, good Mexican food, and to do the dishes. When your grandma and your mom moved into the house when it was finished, Grandma Elizabeth, because the freeway people wanted to take her house. So she sold her house, and no, she didn't sell it to the freeway. She actually sold the house to somebody that was speculating that the freeway would take it.
What freeway?
96, and they thought that they would make some money on the transaction, and they probably did. Grandma sold the house for about $2,500, and and I would imagine, I was guesstimating at the time that if the freeway came, they might be able to double their money, the people that bought it. Freeway came, and it turned out that was the last house taken, and the guy that bought it probably made money selling the house. He made a speculation, and it happened, because at the time that Grandma sold, nobody was sure. They knew the freeway was coming, but nobody was sure where the cutoff was going to be house-wise.
They didn't take her house, though. Her house
they
is
didn't?
still there.
Oh, it is. Oh, I thought they sold it.
No, her house is still there.
Oh, okay.
But it's the last one on the corner.
Okay, so the guy didn't make any money on it.
No, he didn't make anything.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so it wasn't. I thought it was taken. So it's still there. Well, I know the house I grew up on, 11708 Coyle, is still there. And, or it was last time I drove by, about maybe 4 years ago. Another early experience, memory, you said, when I was, I don't know how old, but somehow or another they tell me I climbed up on my dog Sambo, my dad's dog Sambo, and got out of the backyard, because they said there's no other way I could have got out of the backyard. And I used to occasionally climb up against the fence, climbing up on top of Sambo against the fence. They had seen me do it, but never seen me get over the fence. But anyway, I escaped. And I walked down the block to the corner, and then I came back looking for my house. And I couldn't find it, because every time I came to the house I thought was mine, it was a different color in my mind. So I went back to the corner, busy corner, with Coyle and Plymouth Road, and sat down on the curb. And the neighbor lady, my friend, became my friend, Kenny Woodruff, his mother, coming back from work, saw me sitting on the corner, brought me home, and told my mom that I'd escaped.
But she didn't know because she was blind.
Yeah, she didn't know because she was blind. She figured I was still out there playing in the backyard. and nobody realized that I'd escaped. And I don't know how long I had escaped for, and I don't even know how old I was, but I would say probably 2 to 3, somewhere in there. Also, when I was very young, I remember my dad holding Sambo with his, thing that he used with the leader dog, and then hooking to that same apparatus, the harness, like a sled on the snow. And Joe and I would get in the sled, and Dad would direct the dog, and we'd walk around, the neighborhood in the snow, and Sambo would pull us, and so on. And
Did Grandpa have a stick?
Grandpa seldom ever used a cane. I can't remember Grandpa using a cane. He used the leader dog. I'm sure he had one. When I was young, Dad used to put in glass eyes, which really, when he took them out, looked scary because he had no, it was just like red skin or something there, raw, But he put in glass eyes, to be presentable in public. He went to church, he went to work, put in the glass eyes. And I know by the time he met May, they were bothering him. They were hurting him. May suggested he just not put in the glass eyes and wear dark glasses, sunglasses. So he started doing that. He wore sunglasses after he started.
How did he become blind?
My dad lost his eyesight at Detroit Steel Products when he was 18 years old. He was a blueprint operator. And somebody had brought out the bottle of ammonia for the next day and set it on a metal table that was sitting over the top of a radiator. And the ammonia came in glass bottles in those days with a cork inside a cork, and the small cork was supposed to blow out if it got too hot so that the bottle wouldn't explode. But Dad went to lift the bottle to move it, and it exploded in his face, and he lost his eyesight. And he went for a few months to a special hospital in Pittsburgh, and they weren't able to do anything about it. He told me once that the doctors in Pittsburgh said the difference had been how they washed his eyes at the Detroit Steel Products or at the hospital in Detroit when it first happened, that if they had used hot water instead of cold water, or one vice versa, that in Pittsburgh they had told them that, whatever they did wrong as far as the temperature of the water would have helped, and so on. I don't know if it would have saved his sight. I don't know.
How old was he?
He was 18. And when he came back from that, he was visiting with a friend of the family. I can't remember his first name, but I'll say Mr. Schmidt. And what the heck is his name? But anyway, Mr. Schmidt had a engineering company with about 100 draftsmen. And the fella that was my dad's next door neighbor, he had a little business going in his basement making compasses. So my dad got the idea to take the compasses from the one neighbor and go to visit the draftsman at Mr. Schmidt's office and see if they needed compasses. And he sold about $70 worth of compasses on his first visit, and he made from that about $30 or $35. And his dad, as a tool and die professional worker, was making at that time only $15 or $20 a day. And my dad thought, this is like taking candy from a baby. And so he got more supplies because the draftsmen are saying, hey, do you have any triangles? Do you have any templates? Do you have any this, that? So he found sources downtown Detroit, Deatskin and B.K. Elliott and K&E, and he would started buying different items from them and putting them in his suitcase and taking them out to the different engineering companies. And pretty soon he was making pretty regular $50 a day in a time
How
when
would he get there?
with the, he got a leader dog, went to Rochester School for the Blind and got a leader dog. Dog's name was Sambo, was a black Labrador retriever. And Dad would go with the dog in a suitcase or
He'd
two.
walk, or somebody
Walk.
would drive him? He would
No,
walk.
he'd walk to the bus stop and go on the bus with the dog and, everywhere all around the city. That's how he got to know the city so well that everyone in the family tells the stories of driving with my dad, and he'd tell them what the next street is and every side street, not just the red lights and so on, and knew where the bus stops were and everything else as they'd be driving. The taxi drivers, he knew the streets better than the taxi drivers. And when I learned to drive, my dad taught me the city basically and all the directions and everything because he'd been traveling, on the buses with Sambo, making business, and for years. And he knew the whole dang city.
How did
from
Grandma
doing that.
become blind?
My mother had a brain tumor when she was 18, and the doctors didn't think it was malignant at first. Turned out to be malignant, and it took her eyesight. And she had one of the earliest plastic surgeries, and a plate they had to open up her skull here, cut it open, and to operate on the brain tumor. And it was successful, but the doctors told her and her family that she probably wouldn't live 3 years. My mom proved them wrong and lived to be 51 years old. It came back when she was 49. They operated again. She had no problem for about a year, but then it came back again, and they couldn't operate, and she became paralyzed. And she was paralyzed for the last year and had nurses and helpers, around the clock to be with her. And so it was a brain tumor. None of these things my parents had are contagious or hereditary on that side. Although my mother's family, my grandfather's side coming from New Mexico. New Mexico is one of the probably the largest area of people with muscular OPMD, which is ocular something another, eye and throat muscular dystrophy. And that's an hereditary form of adult onset muscular dystrophy that I have inherited. And I got it from my grandfather. My mother probably didn't live long enough to know that she had it. Certainly she didn't live long enough to know.
Her father had it.
Yes. Did I say my father?
Yeah.
Her father. My grandfather, Reynaldo Ortez, Douglas Reynaldo and Joseph Sebastian, our family names that have gotten. We don't have a first name Reynaldo. I'm a little disappointed in that. My grandfather was married to another woman than my grandmother, Elizabeth, and Grandma Ortez was Genevieve, excuse me. Get confused here. Anyway, his first wife died during the plague. The whole family was in Las Vegas, New Mexico at the time, and my grandfather was part of a large family, I'm going to say 8 or 9 kids, and he was one of the older ones, if not the oldest. I can't remember his younger sister's name, but his youngest sister left us a bunch of audios on tape. should get them transferred
Nancy?
sometime. I don't remember her name. I don't think that's what it is, but I don't know. Anyway, my grandfather's youngest sister left of tapes telling us stories. Well, anyway, when Grandpa's wife, first wife, they had one child, Ronaldo Ortez, Uncle Ray. He passed away a few years ago. He lived in California all his life, or moved to California when he got married and lived in California all his life. And we didn't have as much interaction as we did with the children of Genevieve, my grandma Genevieve, same name as my mother. And would be Aunt Pearl, Aunt Ernie, Aunt Nora, and Uncle Joe. And they had two children that died young. One, Rosalie, that died playing with matches and hiding under the bed in her bedroom, caused a fire in the house, and she died in the fire. And then my Uncle Bob, that my middle name comes from, Uncle Roberto was his name, and my Robert comes from Uncle Roberto. And he died just after the Second World War ended. Only the Japanese submarine that sunk his ship, the USS Indianapolis, had not received word, because they were on silent whatever, that the war was over. And they torpedoed the USS Indianapolis, and my Uncle Bob was on that ship. So my mother's family of siblings, my dad's siblings, were Oscar, that I've spoken about, my favorite aunt, Aunt Betty, or Elizabeth, and my Aunt Helen, who was the youngest and also died first. I think she was in her 50s when she passed away, and early 50s. So anyway, so you got a little bit of
OPMD again.
Okay, well, I have something throat, for the throat, and muscular dystrophy. And I got it from the Hispanic side of my family, from my grandfather, Ronaldo Ortez, and the Hispanic people are one of the two highest concentrations of this disease. And there is, many hundreds of people with the disease in New Mexico, some of them in Nevada and in California that have moved from New Mexico. Anyway, it's hereditary. I have a 50-50 chance of passing it to my children. And if one of my children has it, they have a 50-50 chance of passing it. Although I understand from my doctor that there is some type of genetic therapy or something that might be able to eliminate the chance of my grandchildren passing it on, or even my children passing it on if they have additional children, and so on. I hope that none of you have gotten this disease. My mom had a 50-50 chance of passing it to hers, and at this point it looks like the odds worked out, because Marianne and I both have it. Marianne sees me 8 years later and what I'm going through, and she has determined that she's going to try to change that, and she's working at it exercise-wise and otherwise to make sure that she can at least slow down the process. Muscular dystrophy is a degenerative disease. I was always told by my doctors, etc., that it don't get better, it just gets worse. And but I'm now also going to therapy, hoping to at least try to maintain some of my muscles longer than they might have been otherwise, and to hopefully wake up, if possible, some of my sleeping muscles. We'll see. Right now I use a scooter to go distances because, well, I can walk on a flat surface, short distances with no bumps in the floor or in the cement or whatever. I trip over very small things because I have a tendency to shuffle. I have great problems with balance and so on because all kinds of muscles in my legs that you would consider normal use aren't working for me. So I have to use, nope, I never hurt. Knock on wood, I never hurt. I don't have any pain. I just have, challenges because I don't have muscle. And because of the missing muscles, I have balance issues. And as my daughter Elizabeth says, Dad, you don't fall off a scooter. And so far, I haven't fallen very many times off the scooter. Only when I'm doing things stupid, like really trying to lean over and pick something up, or like a couple days ago, petting Punky over the rail in Samantha's office. And I tipped over, and the little gate ended up on top of poor Punky. Scared the heck out of her. Scared the heck out of me. That I might have hurt her. I mean, it didn't hurt me, but I'm sure it hurt her. Anyway, I have to take a second to look at the list of questions that you've given me here to do. Why did I decide to go into the family business? I don't know. I guess I always admired my dad and what he was doing, working with Dad, reading mail, helping him pull orders and things like that, going to the office, as much as possible, going to taking him around instead of the dog on weekends, and summer vacation, winter vacations. I just grew up in it, and that's what I wanted to do. I mean, my dream when I was young is to take Dad's business with Detroit-based business and make it all Detroit, then all Michigan, then all USA. I never thought when I was really young about going international, but about taking the business across the country. And when I was a young guy, my dad used to always say, he don't need a catalog. And we had no catalog. We used to use everybody's catalog. We'd tell the customers, whatever brand you're used to using, we'll get it for you. And what we would do, if somebody ordered a Dietzken catalog number, let's say, we'd try to see if we had the same item or similar item in stock. And then if we had it in stock, we'd ship what we had. If we didn't, we'd get it from Dietzken, most likely. And the same with all of them. But it made every order a little bit complicated because, the customers would be ordering from 5 different catalogs, and we'd have to figure out which catalog they're ordering from, and then try to make an order out of it that we could deliver. And so I don't know how old I was, but I was a teenager, and I took a vacation, for a week, and decided to make a catalog. And then I went around, I was probably 18 or 19, and I took the catalog, 16 pages. I took pictures out of everybody's catalog and literally just cut and paste onto pages the most common items that we were selling, and then made catalog numbers which were close to the catalog number of the supplier that we sold the most of. For example, we sold Bruning drawing paper. Their number was 311 for the paper. So I called it K311 for Kapp. And then put it in the catalog. So anyway, now the catalogs cost about 50 cents to make. And my dad didn't want to have a catalog. He kept telling me, him and Sambo never needed a catalog. Why the heck I can see, and talk, and how come I need a catalog when he and Sambo didn't need one? So anyway, I just went on my own and made this catalog. Then I went around to blue printers in the area and I showed them the catalog and said, I'll put your name on it. The catalog cost 25 cents. That's what it was, about 24, 25 cents. And I think the first production run was like 1,000. And I went around and sold other blue printers for 50 cents, half of them. And that made our catalogs free. So my dad couldn't argue about a free catalog. Well, the catalog eventually every time got a little bigger, and I kept upping the price to the blue printers and expanding, across the country, the blue printers that were using it, to the point we were running 100,000 catalogs at a time. And we offered it in 5 different color designs and 3 delicious colors, and the price got up to about $1.50. But with the bigger quantities, the price was going down, even though the catalog was up to 100 pages or more, and so on. And my dad, I was so proud. One day I heard him talking to somebody on the phone about our business, and he was talking about AC and BC. He says, before catalog and after catalog, AC and BC. He says, our business really started to grow after we came out with a catalog. Made me so proud.
In the basement.
Yep. All you kids made catalogs, assembled them in the basement with GBC binders as they got bigger. In the beginning, it was a simple staple in the corner, the first ones I did, when it was 16 pages. But then the GBC comb binders, they called them. And the machine we had in the basement, punch them and put the binder on, and so on. We sold hundreds of thousands of catalogs to people, and always sold them at a profit to pay for our catalog. So in fact, in the last few years, before the computers sort of destroyed the drafting business, we were making a profit on catalogs. It was a profit center. But anyway, my dad became a real fan of the catalog, as he saw how it made working with a customer much easier, to have them ordering our numbers from our catalog, so we carried what we had, and instead of trying to carry 5 brands of stuff and running around to 5 or 6 different local vendors to get it, and so on. So we were able to handle many more orders and handle the orders more quickly, and communication with a customer. And then the competitors figuring out, what to sell them, they had to figure out what we had instead of us figuring out what they had. And we offered a delivery service in the local area that was second to none. I mean, you placed your order in the morning before 10:30, you got it today. And we went after every little customer that those big guys didn't want. And we had thousands of small customers. And then along came computers and changed the industry. In 1977, I saw the first computer system at Fisher Body. A fellow named of Benny Dibb at Fisher Body showed me, how these CAD systems work. They were about $250,000 a piece, he said. But he says, they don't use anything you sell, Dennis. He says, if these things ever catch on, you're going to have a real problem. So I went back, told my dad about them, and we sat down and said, we better find something else to do, to supplement our business if these things take over. So we started to concentrate on chairs, because we figure there's more chairs than people, and people are going to always sit down to do something, whether it's drafting or working on a computer. We felt small top blueprint machines. The small blueprint machines would always be there. Well, they're not there these days, but they were there for a long time. And then we looked at art supplies. We decided to test it. We called silver lead and had silver lead put in art supplies for the in our retail store on Farmington Road where we were at that time. So we should take a small break. Can you splice? Okay. I have somebody there I have to take care of. Okay.